Hey guys, so let's get into this build. As you can see, I already have. Too exciting. Love new builds. So just some. Let's get started with some tools. I think that's pretty basic, and bear with me on these videos. I'm still trying to figure out what angles work, what doesn't, and if any of you guys are video people, feel free to send me a message, chime in, tell me how I could do things better. The audio is so-so. I got a cheapo Amazon microphone on there, looking for something to upgrade with that. But anyway, we'll get started. So some basic tools that you need to build a 250R, or really any quad. They're all, as far as I know, I don't know about Yamaha, but most of them are all metric. So most of my toolkits are a mix or a bunch of metric stuff. So impact gun. Definitely helps in a lot of different areas, especially with getting hub bolts or hub nuts on, tightening those up, stuff like that. Some small tools, a screwdriver. This is just a cheapo Harbor Freight. I like the interchangeable. I have 4 different bits right in this. A good metric Allen set, and I like this one because they slide out, keeps it nice and tidy. Small pliers. Nippers, if you're taking apart an old one, you have zip ties and stuff to cut, a good set of these. C-clip expander, and this one is reversible, so I can either squeeze it in or push it out. This little kit actually is one of the things I use the most. It's a metric kit, goes up to 12 millimeter, little handle, great to have on me all the time at the tracks. But I find I use that so much, it's just really handy. A nice dead blow hammer. I use this a ton, positioning A-arms and stuff like that. This Harbor Freight, I think this is a 3-pound, super cheap. A 3/8, a smaller impact driver, 3/8 set. Then your wrench set, I use a Husky mix set. I like these ones with the ratchet, the 2-sided. These ratchets come in handy. A lot of times, in certain areas, you can't use the ratchet because it's a little too thick, but still nice to have. And then a bolt kit. You can obviously reuse the old bolts, but I figured you're building a showroom quality quad, why use old bolts? So I use SpecBolt, specbolt.com, and I buy their 250-piece kit for the 250R. I think I've had like 5 of these now. I have one for the 450R. They also sell separate kits with just A-arm bolts, with engine bolts and all that stuff. All zinc coated, good quality stuff. They're based here in California in San Dimas, so I support them. And it's just nice to be able to grab a bolt, nut, washer, whatever, not have to dig through a little parts bin that you have or something else. These are all organized. So really nice thing to have. So that's tools. Oh, and then of course, one of my favorites, anti-seize. Doesn't matter what brand, but I pretty much put anti-seize on everything. So when I start building a quad, obviously this came back from powder, all nice and fresh. I'll put the subframe on. If you have an OEM, then obviously you're going to skip that step. But 4 bolts, subframe, lock it down, good to go. The next step that I do is I put all my rubber grommets in. So you're going to have 2 down here for the radiator. You're going to have the 2 up here for the seat. And then you're going to have a couple for the airbox, and then here in the rear for the seat posts. So get all that small stuff out of the way. The other thing I do is I put in my chain slider on the frame and my chain roller on the frame. And I use TM Designs for all my rollers and sliders. High quality stuff. I really don't see any reason to go with anything else. So once that's done, now we can start building it out. And I don't think there's a right or wrong order of building a quad. In fact, I never use the same order. Sometimes I start with the front, sometimes I start with the rear. The only thing I kind of do consistently is I get the radiator in. So that just slides in, down in the posts. I'll put on my 2 brackets. I'll tighten the inner one, the right side. The left side I'll leave loose. I won't tighten that bolt because I know I need that for ground and connections there. So I'll leave that alone. Now this one, all my bikes use RTC shrouds and radiators, radiator shrouds and louvers. So well, let me take a step back. The radiator itself. This is actually just an eBay radiator because I'm waiting for a triple core brand new radiator that actually Rob Selby is getting one, I think next week sometime. So he wanted to check it out. So this is going to be replaced. And if you're a recreational rider, an OEM radiator or the eBay GPI, I think they're called, they're probably going to be fine. For me, because I race, I generate more heat. I'm on that throttle nonstop for 50 minutes in a works race. So it's just peace of mind for the heat issues, especially when you're running a big bore. I like to have a good radiator. My race bike has an AFCO on it. AFCO is a great radiator. CBR, PWR, they're all good radiators. So if you're recreational, you can go with OEM. You can go with one of these eBay guys. I've used these before, never had an issue. But for these, now that I'm running a 363, I just want a better radiator. So this will get swapped out. Back to the louvers and the shrouds. So I use RTC shrouds and louvers on all my bikes. And Brian Marion created them, and he's on Facebook. You could search him, Brian Marion, M-A-R-I-O-N. And he's been making these things forever. They've been well tested, and I really don't have any heat issues unless it's a brand new board. I'm trying to break it in. So as far as using louvers, they're not required. And a lot of people say, what are they, just for looks? Well, they're not. So with his setup, when you put the shrouds on, they're tied up against the radiator sides. In fact, he even uses a piece of weather stripping in there to keep it sealed. And if you think about how air moves, it's going to move in a circular motion. Think about all air. You got tornadoes and all this other stuff. When it collides, it creates a circular motion. So what a set of louvers does is that shroud is going to push the air in, and if you don't have the louvers, some of the air is going to go through the fins, but a lot of it is going to swirl back out. So the louvers actually help drive that air in through the fins, and you're going to get the benefits of the cooling. So, again, you don't need them recreational riding, no big deal. The 250R, especially with the big board, needs as much airflow as it can get. You don't have to worry about that with the 450R because they have a fan in the back or any four-stroke. But the 250R, people say that, oh, the shocks get in the way, your bumper, some of those big cross bumpers and stuff. I think if you have a good setup like this, you don't have an issue. In fact, my Wrath bumper is basically with the number plate in it. It kind of blocks this whole center. And then I have my steering you got the steering stem, the steering stabilizer, all this stuff blocking airflow, and I've never had an issue. And so again, up to you if you want to run them or not. I'll put Brian's name in the show notes. And great guy. In fact, he even told me, he's like, I had a guy that was pulling a small trailer with like some little Toyota Yaris or some little car like that, and it was facing forward. It had so much airflow, it actually ripped the shrouds off of the frame. So, I don't know, it seems to say something to me. But Brian's a great guy. This is probably my fifth or sixth set that I've bought, so I don't deviate. If you're building a Garage Queen or a show bike, I really like the look of Forworks carbon fiber shrouds, and I had a set. My problem was there was a huge gap between the shroud and the radiator, and I knew all that air was just going to come in and go right out the side. So, in the racing world, that just wasn't going to cut it. Sorry, Jason. So, once I get this stuff on, now what I'll do is the steering stem. And I'm going to go through this. First thing I'll do is take anti-seize and put it around the cup. All inside the cup, so that bearing doesn't want to seize up in there. And again, with the race bikes, I take them apart enough that it's never really been an issue. But I just use it anyway. makes stuff slide out easier when you want to knock it out. So when you have an empty cup, normally I use all new stuff, but the bearing in this case was still in good shape. So you've got your steering stem bearing. You're going to drop that in, and sometimes you're going to get some powder. That's another good thing to have, is a utility knife of some sort. You're going to get some powder buildup, even though they tape it off. There's always some around there that's going to hold you up. So I just run the razor around that powder, shave it off, and that's going to make the bearing drop in a little bit easier. You want to try to get in there as straight as possible. So once we do that, I'm going to get it in there. And then I use, in this case, 30mm socket works perfectly. And the one thing you want to make sure the socket is big enough to hit the outer race and not, you don't want to put pressure on that inner one or in the seal itself. So you just get it on there and then just start tapping it in. And you'll kind of try to get it straight. You'll see which side you need to hit. Sometimes they slide right in, sometimes they fight you. Alright, so now that's going in pretty straight. I need to get a new work stand because these stands are just a little bit all over the place. And you could actually do this, it might be better to do this step first before the radiator, so you have more room to work. Not that there's a ton of room to work anyway. Getting there. Of course, this one's being stubborn. Maybe it's because I had that steering stop well upgraded. Get it down until you can see that ring where the C-clip goes in. See the ring. So we're in there. Now we can take our C-clip, and again, this one is right now, this one we need to squeeze in. These are set up to squeeze out. So I'm going to flip these clamps. So what's nice about this reversible one, I think I just got this at Lowe's or Home Depot, Vice Grip brand. The only thing I don't like about this one is the reach. When I'm doing the carrier, it doesn't quite pull it far enough. Seated, and then after it's in there, I usually just take that socket again, just give it a light tap. tap to make sure it's fully seated. That's in there. All right, so now that that's in place, then we take the seal, the top seal, solid. You're going to have an inner groove, and the top will be solid. So top goes in, and this you should just be able to push in by hand. And I just make it flush with the top. It doesn't need to be down, sitting on the bearing. This way it keeps more water out of the cup itself. So now we can take our steering stem. So talking about steering stems in length and plus forward, I wish I had an easy answer for that, but it's really personal preference. If you're tall, I'd say I'm 5'11", I like the +2. So if you're taller than I am, definitely want a +2. I also, because I'm taller, I have long arms, so I like the +1. And if you're going to run a desert tank, then you definitely want a +1. So if you're going to run a desert tank, I think you can get away with a +1, but a +2, +1 is even better. That way it clears the tank turning and your bars aren't hitting anything. As far as brand, any aftermarket chrome moly, this one is an LSR. I have an ISF on the hybrid, and I have a Leggers on the Race R. All good stems. This one was actually bent. This is the one that I did the cartwheel in the hybrid and bent the stem. So I sent it to Steve Buczynski at ISF, and he straightened it for me because it didn't kink. If it kinks when you bend it, don't even bother. It's trash. But if this was a slight bend and he was able to straighten it, it's not perfectly round where he straightened it, but I think it's going to be fine. I actually haven't tried it, so we'll see how it feels. So once you have that, you can drop your stem in. Carefully not to bang up that nice powder. Right in there. Now, sometimes I've had issues with stems before where they were just a little bit off and they wouldn't seat down in the cup, in the bearing. And this one just clears. This one's good. But if you find that you can't get this thing to seat down all the way, then chances are the bearing is a little bit crooked or something else is off. These LSR frames, they do have their issues, but yeah, don't force it. If it won't go, you should not be able to see any of the bottom of the stem where that rides on the bearing. So you want to get that down in there. So now what I'll do is I'm going to put my stem clamp on. So as far as stem clamps, again, I use billet. You can use Lone Star, any of the big brands out there. This one was actually made by Brian May. He's in the Facebook groups, started making his own, and I had him send me a blank and I etched my logo into it. So I'm gonna use this on this build. And then, the other thing I forgot is the bushing. So there's two style bushings for the 250R. You've got this OEM style that just has one slit, pry it open and put it on. It's got a Teflon coating inside. And then you've got a two-piece. And I want to say Nax made this, but I don't remember. But basically, I think this is Delrin, so it's going to last pretty much forever, whereas these OEM ones will wear out over time. So either one, you can't buy these Nax, if it is Nax, you can't buy these anymore. I have a few of them off of takeoffs from other quads. So I'm going to use that in this. The other thing you'll find with a new stem is if it's powder coated, a lot of times you're going to have an issue with it being super tight until that powder wears down. So there's not much you can really do about it. It's just one of those things that you can loosen the bolts a little bit. Obviously not enough where it's going to be an issue, but you can loosen the bolts. See, I can kind of feel, I'm wondering if I should use the other one just because, well, let me bolt it up. Let's see, I can always swap it later. So put the clamp on, line up the holes, then we can put the inner bushing in, or the top, the outer bushing here. This is the nice thing about a dead blow. I use this thing so much around the shop, so you don't smash stuff up. This might end up being a little too tight. All right, so again, I use anti-seize on all my bolts. You only need a little bit. I just put it on the end, because once that goes in, it's going to spiral up through the rest of the threads. And anytime you have dissimilar metals, steel to aluminum, you're going to get corrosion over time. And even though this is steel to steel, where the threads go in, it's still, for me, you get water and stuff in there, and the threads aren't powdered, so you will get some rust. So, I just, peace of mind again. When I come back to this later, I don't want to have to be drilling out bolts. All right. There's my other Allen. And obviously, guys, a lot of this stuff that I go over, anyone who's building quads for a while, this is nothing new to you, but there's a lot of guys out there who might be getting into a restore, might be starting out with their first quad, so that's why I figured I'd really walk through all the steps, because what's obvious to some is not obvious to others. So wherever I can help some guys, that's really the goal. I'm not going to crank these all the way down. And a lot of times I leave a lot of bolts loose during the build in case I need to take them out. And then obviously I make sure I go back, do a once over at the end, and just make sure everything's good and tight. So then the last piece would be, there's a bushing that goes in the bottom of the stem, and then your nut. I think there's a washer that sometimes go on, but I don't even need it. Everything lines up fine. Slide that bushing on, slide your nut on, and I think this is a 19 millimeter that you would use to tighten it up. So see, that's super tight right now. Obviously the stem's not turning in the whole quad, so the frame is. So I think that, because I got that stem straightened and it's slightly out of round, I think I'm going to have to use the other style, because this one is a little bit thinner. I think it'll have a little more give. All right, so next step. We're going to put in our handlebar clamp. And again, any of the major brands is fine. Lone Star, this is a Leggers. I have Leggers on my bikes. Walsh, whatever you have access to. And these are 17 millimeter. So, definitely recommend the anti-vibe, and pretty much all of them are these days. These bushings, they're going to help absorb some of the shock. Don't expect to not have any vibration, but anything we can do to minimize the vibration is a plus. So put these in, slide them on. It'll be an inner sleeve, aluminum sleeve. So I just kind of leave that in place. Push it down through, slide the bottom bushing in, and sometimes these are really tight. If they're new, they haven't compressed at all, you can fight with them to try to get the nut on, because it won't let the bottom sleeve go on. So just keep that in mind. I've had to do some tricks to get them on. This one is, took off another bike. And then once they're on, then we can tighten it up. And how much you tighten it is kind of up to you. You don't need to turn this down. Extensions help when you can get them in there. So before you tighten this up, you want to put the top cap on. Just put the bolts in loosely. I will coat these bolts. I will put some anti-seize on these bolts, especially because you're threading these directly into aluminum. So that's where you're going to get the most corrosion. But this, you want to do this just to keep it straight while you're tightening up the lower nuts. You'll see them kind of squeeze out a little bit. Probably want to leave maybe 1/16 of an inch, a little bit hair more. They don't have to be super tight. These are nylocks. I've never had one come loose. All right, so now we know when our bottom mounts are straight. So this I'm just going to leave as is right now. And while I'm here, I can just tighten up this. So, okay, so this one's a 22. So if you're buying a kit, and I just got these at Harbor Freight. Obviously, it's the Milwaukee drill, or Impact, but the stuff like sockets, I've not had any issues with Harbor Freight. You can crank down pretty good. Of course, you can torque it. I'll tell you right now, I'm not a big torque guy, unless I'm working on a motor. Everything else I kind of do by feel. I've done enough of them by now. I haven't had anything fall off. The only thing I've ever had fall off is a swing arm pivot bolt nut, and that it wasn't because of tightening. I had two or three fall off of the race R, and I still haven't figured out why. I even had it shear off a cotter pin, so it's kind of strange, but all right, so I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to keep these videos kind of short, a little bit shorter, so I'm going to do these in small segments because I know it gets a little annoying watching a long YouTube video. So next step, we'll probably end up doing the rear end. I'm either going to do the bars and controls, or I'm going to do the rear end. The front end of this is actually coming off the race R, so I need to pull that, take it all apart so I can show you guys as if we're doing a fresh build, even though that's already set up. So yeah, I'll probably do another video. Like I said, this is going to move pretty quick. I need to get this one up and running so that I can finish tearing down, completely tear down the race R. All right, guys, see you in the next one.